Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. This indictment was voted by a grand jury of citizens in the Southern District of Florida, and I invite everyone to read it in full to understand the scope and the gravity of the crimes charged. The men and women of the United States intelligence community and our armed forces dedicate their lives to protecting our nation and its people. Our laws that protect national defense information are critical for the safety and security of the United States.
Okay, so imagine you're in a federal courtroom. The air is thick with tension. Special Counsel Jack Smith, the prosecutor who's been investigating Donald Trump for years, is presenting evidence to the judge. Not arguments, not legal theories, actual evidence, documents, communications, audio recordings. And as this evidence is revealed, witnesses in the courtroom describe audible gasps, people literally trembling as they see what's being presented. Because this isn't circumstantial stuff. This isn't speculation. This is direct, documented proof of what Trump did to try to overturn the 2020 election and hide classified materials. We're talking about sealed communications that show Trump knew exactly what he was doing, documents proving he lied to his own lawyers, audio recordings catching him in the act of criminal schemes, and it's all being handed directly to the judge who will decide Trump's fate. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Violations of those laws put our country at risk. Adherence to the rule of law is a bedrock principle of the Department of Justice, and our nation's commitment to the rule of law sets an example for the world. We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone. Applying those laws, collecting facts, that's what determines the outcome of an investigation. Nothing more and nothing less. The prosecutors in my office are among the most talented and experienced in the Department of Justice. They have investigated this case hewing to the highest ethical standards.
This happened in November 2025, and the shockwaves are still reverberating through Washington, because this isn't just another filing in Trump's endless legal battles. This is Special Counsel Jack Smith, after years of investigation and court fights, finally laying his cards on the table. He's showing the judge, and soon the public, exactly what evidence he has, and according to people who were there, is devastating. The kind of evidence that makes conviction not just possible, but likely. The kind of evidence that Trump's lawyers have been desperately trying to keep sealed and hidden, and now it's out there, in the hands of a federal judge who's already shown she's not impressed with Trump's delay tactics. But here's what makes this moment even more critical. The DOJ itself is in crisis, and I mean genuine, institutional crisis. According to a Washington Post investigation, thousands of experienced career attorneys have left the Justice Department since Trump's rise to power. Thousands. These aren't political appointees who leave when administrations change. These are career prosecutors, the people who are supposed to provide continuity and institutional memory and expertise, and they're fleeing. Some are being pushed out. Some are leaving voluntarily because they can't stomach what's happening to their institution. And the result is that the DOJ is hollowed out at exactly the moment when it needs to be strong enough to prosecute a former president. The timing couldn't be worse or more suspicious. As Jack Smith is presenting evidence that could finally hold Trump accountable, the very institution that's supposed to prosecute that case is collapsing from within. Career officials are warning that the integrity of prosecutions, especially those targeting Trump and his inner circle, is at serious risk. There are critical gaps in staffing and expertise, morale is in the basement, and the people who remain are under enormous pressure from political appointees who may not want these cases to succeed. It's a perfect storm of institutional breakdown happening right when accountability matters most. Let's talk about what Jack Smith actually handed over, because the details are stunning. According to sources familiar with the evidence, this includes previously sealed communications between Trump and his advisors about overturning the 2020 election, not vague discussions, specific plans, explicit conversations about how to pressure DOJ officials, manufacture fraudulent slates of electors, and use force and threats to stay in power after losing. We're talking about Trump knowingly participating in criminal schemes and getting caught on tape or in writing, doing it. The evidence also includes documentation about the classified documents case. Judge Beryl Howell had already ruled earlier that Smith's team presented compelling preliminary evidence that Trump misled his own lawyers about keeping classified materials. That ruling was huge because it pierced attorney-client privilege. The judge essentially said Trump used his lawyers to further crimes, which means their communications aren't protected. And now Smith is presenting that evidence in full. Documents showing Trump knew he had classified materials. Records showing he lied about returning them. Communications showing he tried to hide them from investigators. It's a paper trail of obstruction and espionage violations. Smith has also released portions of his special counsel report and grand jury materials that lay out Trump's criminal efforts in explicit detail. This isn't summary or allegation. This is the actual evidence that went before grand juries, testimony from witnesses, documentary evidence, a comprehensive picture of Trump's conduct, and it describes criminal behavior, not political disagreements or policy disputes, actual crimes, conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of justice, mishandling classified information. It's all there in black and white. The reaction in Washington has been a mixture of vindication and panic. Democrats and Trump critics feel vindicated because this evidence confirms what they've been saying for years. Trump committed crimes, serious crimes, and now there's proof. They're using this to support impeachment efforts, to justify continued investigations, and to argue that Trump must be held accountable. Meanwhile, Trump's allies are in panic mode because if this evidence is as strong as it appears, Trump is in serious legal jeopardy. Not theoretical jeopardy, actual go-to prison jeopardy, and they're running out of ways to protect him. Trump himself has responded predictably. Attacks on Jack Smith, claims that the evidence is fabricated or taken out of context, accusations of a witch hunt and political persecution. But those attacks are less effective when a federal judge has seen the evidence and found it compelling enough to pierce attorney-client privilege. When grand juries have returned indictments based on this evidence. When the special counsel is confident enough to hand it over for judicial review, Trump can spin all he wants, but the evidence speaks for itself. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what evidence Jack Smith presented, why Judge Howell's earlier rulings matter so much, what the DOJ crisis means for prosecuting Trump, and why this moment could be the beginning of real serious legal accountability that Trump has managed to avoid for years. This is the end game, and it's playing out in real time. Alright, let's dig into the specifics of what Jack Smith actually presented, because every detail makes Trump's situation worse. First, we need to understand what a special counsel is and why Smith's evidence matters so much. A special counsel is appointed when there are potential conflicts of interest in normal prosecutions. In Trump's case, he was a sitting president when some of these crimes allegedly occurred, and he's a former president now, so there are serious questions about whether regular DOJ prosecutors could handle the case without political interference. That's why Jack Smith was appointed as an independent special counsel with the authority to investigate and prosecute without normal DOJ supervision. Smith has been investigating two main areas: Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election and Trump's handling of classified documents after leaving office. Both investigations have resulted in indictments. Trump has been criminally charged in both cases, but Trump's legal team has been fighting tooth and nail to delay trials, suppress evidence, and ultimately avoid accountability. They've used every legal tactic available: motions to dismiss, claims of immunity, attempts to disqualify judges and prosecutors, fights over attorney-client privilege. And for a while, these tactics worked to some extent. Trials got delayed, evidence stayed sealed, Trump avoided immediate consequences. But Judge Beryl Howell changed the game with a critical ruling earlier in the process. She reviewed evidence that Smith's team presented about Trump's handling of classified documents, and she found that the evidence showed Trump likely used his attorney-client relationship to further crimes. Specifically, she ruled that there was compelling preliminary evidence that Trump misled his own lawyers about retaining classified materials. This is huge, because attorney-client privilege is supposed to protect communications between lawyers and clients. But there's an exception. If you're using your lawyer to commit or further a crime, the privilege doesn't apply. That's called the crime fraud exception. Judge Howell's ruling meant that communications between Trump and his lawyers about the classified documents could be turned over to prosecutors. Evidence that would normally be privileged and protected was now available for the investigation, and what that evidence apparently shows is damning. Trump knew he had classified materials. He knew he was supposed to return them. He lied to his lawyers about whether he'd return them. He directed efforts to hide materials from investigators, and his lawyers either knowingly or unknowingly made representations to the government based on Trump's lies. That's obstruction of justice. That's the crime fraud exception in action. And Judge Howell's ruling opened the door for all of that evidence to come into play. Now fast forward to the recent courtroom moment where Smith handed over evidence directly to the judge. This is part of the ongoing criminal proceedings against Trump. Smith is showing the judge what evidence he has to support the charges, and sources who were present described the moment as stunning. The evidence included communications that haven't been made public before. documents showing the planning and execution of schemes to overturn election results, audio recordings where Trump discusses what he's doing and why. It's the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about because it's direct, it's contemporaneous, and it comes from Trump himself or people directly involved in the schemes. The evidence on the election interference side is particularly comprehensive. Smith's special counsel report, portions of which have been released, describes Trump's criminal efforts to disrupt the 2020 election in explicit detail. We're talking about Trump pressuring DOJ officials to announce fake investigations into election fraud, Trump and his team manufacturing fraudulent slates of electors in states he lost, Trump using threats and lies to pressure state officials to overturn results, Trump's role in inciting the January 6 Capitol attack. All of this is documented with witness testimony, contemporaneous communications, and records. The report describes how Trump pressured the acting attorney general and other senior DOJ officials to help him overturn the election. He wanted them to make public statements claiming there was evidence of fraud even though DOJ had investigated and found no such evidence. When they refused, Trump considered replacing them with someone who would do what he wanted. That's abuse of power. That's obstruction of official proceedings. And it's all documented. The fraudulent elector scheme is another major piece. Trump and his team organized fake slates of electors in states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These fake electors met and signed documents claiming to be the legitimate electors even though Trump had lost those states. The plan was to use these fake slates to create confusion and give Vice President Pence an excuse to delay or reject the certification of Biden's victory. This wasn't a legitimate legal challenge. This was a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States, and the evidence shows Trump was directly involved in planning and executing it. Then there's the January 6th connection. Smith's evidence shows that Trump knew his claims about election fraud were false. He'd been told repeatedly by his own advisors, his own attorney general, his own campaign lawyers, that there was no evidence of fraud sufficient to change the result. But he kept pushing the claims anyway. He organized the rally on January 6th. He gave a speech telling his supporters to march to the Capitol and fight. And when the violence erupted, he refused for hours to call it off, even as people were dying and the Capitol was being breached. The evidence shows this wasn't spontaneous or accidental. It was part of Trump's broader scheme to stay in power after losing the election. On the classified document side, the evidence is equally damning. Judge Howe already found compelling preliminary evidence that Trump misled his lawyers. Now Smith is presenting the full picture. After leaving office, Trump took hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago. The National Archives tried to get them back. Trump's lawyers negotiated and eventually returned some documents, claiming they'd done a thorough search and that was everything. But it wasn't everything. Trump had kept more documents. And when the FBI executed a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, they found them. Boxes of classified materials in a bathroom, in a ballroom, in unsecured locations. The evidence shows Trump knew he had these documents. He showed some of them to people who didn't have security clearances, even acknowledging that they were classified and he probably shouldn't be sharing them. He discussed hiding documents from his own lawyers so they couldn't be returned to the government. He directed staff to move boxes to prevent them from being found. This isn't negligent mishandling. This is willful retention of national defense information and obstruction of the investigation. And Smith has the evidence to prove it, including testimony from Trump's own staff who follow his orders and are now cooperating with prosecutors. Now let's talk about the DOJ crisis because it's directly relevant to whether Trump will actually face consequences. The Washington Post investigation revealed that thousands of career attorneys have left the Justice Department. These aren't low-level staff. These are experienced prosecutors who handle complex federal cases. Their departure creates enormous problems. Institutional knowledge is lost. Cases become harder to prosecute because the people who built them aren't there anymore. And the people who remain are often junior, less experienced, or demoralized. Why are they leaving? Multiple factors. Some are being pushed out by political appointees who want to reshape the department. Some are leaving voluntarily because they're disgusted by the politicization of justice. Some are exhausted from years of political pressure and attacks. And some are specifically concerned about being involved in controversial cases, like the Trump prosecutions. The result is a DOJ that's weaker and less capable at exactly the moment when it needs to be at its strongest. This creates real risks for the Trump prosecutions. Complex cases require experienced prosecutors who know how to handle sophisticated defenses, navigate procedural challenges, and present evidence effectively to juries. If the DOJ doesn't have enough of those people, or if the people handling the cases are inexperienced or politically pressured, the prosecutions could fail even with strong evidence. That's what career officials are warning about. The institution might not be capable of seeing these cases through to successful conclusions. There are also concerns about political interference. If political appointees at DOJ don't want the Trump prosecutions to succeed, they can undermine them in subtle ways, not providing resources, not prioritizing the cases, making it harder for prosecutors to do their jobs. And if career prosecutors keep leaving, the people left to handle these cases might be more susceptible to political pressure because they're less secure in their positions or less experienced in resisting it. This institutional crisis adds urgency to Jack Smith's evidence presentation. He's racing against time, against institutional collapse, against political interference. He needs to get the evidence on the record, get it in front of judges and juries before the DOJ crisis makes successful prosecution impossible. That's part of why he's moving aggressively now. He knows the window might be closing. The broader implications are troubling. If the DOJ can't successfully prosecute a former president who allegedly committed serious crimes, what does that say about the rule of law in America? If an institution can be hollowed out and weakened to the point where accountability becomes impossible, what prevents future presidents from committing even worse abuses? These aren't just questions about Trump. These are questions about whether American democracy can function. Okay, let's break this down into core points. Point 1. Jack Smith has presented devastating evidence directly to the judge in Trump's criminal cases. This includes previously sealed communications, documents, and audio recordings showing Trump's involvement in criminal schemes to overturn the 2020 election and hide classified materials. Judge Howell already ruled that some of this evidence shows Trump likely used his lawyers to commit crimes, which allowed attorney-client privilege to be pierced. Now the full scope of evidence is being presented, and sources say it's compelling enough to support convictions. Point 2. The evidence covers multiple criminal schemes with detailed documentation. On the election interference side, there's proof Trump pressured DOJ officials, organized fraudulent elector slates, used threats and lies against state officials, and incited the January 6 violence while knowing his fraud claims were false. On the classified document side, there's proof Trump knowingly kept classified materials, showed them to unauthorized people, lied to his lawyers about returning them, and directed staff to hide them from investigators. This isn't circumstantial. This is direct evidence of criminal conduct. Point 3. The DOJ is an institutional crisis at exactly the wrong time. Thousands of career prosecutors have left, creating gaps in expertise and institutional knowledge. Morale is terrible. Career officials warn that prosecutions, especially high-profile ones like Trump's cases, are at risk of failing due to lack of resources and political pressure. This means even with strong evidence, successful prosecution isn't guaranteed if the institution itself is too weak or compromised to see cases through. In point 4, this is a moment of reckoning for American justice and the rule of law. If Trump can be prosecuted and held accountable, despite being a former president, it shows the system can work. If the prosecutions fail despite strong evidence because of institutional collapse or political interference, it shows the system is broken and accountability for powerful people is impossible. Either way, this moment will define how presidential accountability works in America going forward. So why does this matter beyond just Trump's personal legal problems? First reason, it's about whether anyone, including presidents, is actually subject to the law. Trump has argued throughout his legal battles that presidents should have immunity from prosecution, that they should be able to do their jobs without fear of legal consequences. But that's not how democracy works. If presidents are above the law, then we don't have a democracy. We have an elected monarchy. Jack Smith's evidence presentation is fundamentally about proving that Trump committed crimes and should face consequences like any other citizen would. Second reason, it's about institutional integrity and the rule of law. The DOJ crisis shows how fragile these institutions are. If career prosecutors flee and political pressure undermines prosecutions, then the justice system can't function properly. That has implications far beyond Trump. It affects every prosecution, every investigation, every effort to hold powerful people accountable. If we can't maintain strong, independent justice institutions, then corruption and abuse of power become inevitable. Third reason, it sets precedent for future presidents. If Trump faces consequences for his actions, it tells future presidents there are real boundaries they can't cross. It establishes that attempting to overturn elections, obstructing investigations, and mishandling classified information will lead to criminal prosecution. But if Trump escapes accountability despite strong evidence, it tells future presidents they can do whatever they want as long as they can politically survive it. That's a dangerous precedent that invites more abuse. Fourth reason, it's about public faith in democracy. A lot of Americans have lost faith that the system can hold powerful people accountable. They've watched Trump survive scandal after scandal. If he's actually prosecuted and held accountable based on evidence, it might restore some of that faith. It might show that the system, while slow and imperfect, can still work. But if he escapes despite compelling evidence, it will confirm for many people that the system is rigged and justice only applies to regular people, not the powerful. Now, what comes next? Trump's criminal trials are proceeding, though slowly due to various legal challenges and delays. With Smith's evidence now on the record and Judge Howell having already ruled that some of it overcomes attorney-client privilege, the path to trial is clearer. Trump's lawyers will continue fighting, filing motions, seeking delays, but the evidence is out there now. It's been presented to judges. It will eventually be presented to juries. The DOJ crisis complicates everything. If career prosecutors continue leaving, if political pressure increases, if resources aren't provided, these prosecutions could still fail despite strong evidence. That's why some legal experts and former DOJ officials are calling for reforms, independent oversight, congressional protections for special counsels, measures to ensure cases can proceed regardless of political pressure. Without institutional strength, even the best evidence might not be enough. Trump's response has been to attack everyone involved. He's called Jack Smith deranged and claimed the prosecutions are politically motivated. He's attacked judges who rule against him. He's tried to turn his legal troubles into a campaign issue, claiming he's being persecuted because he's a political threat. But those arguments are harder to sustain when judges have reviewed the evidence and found it compelling, when grand juries have returned indictments, when the evidence keeps accumulating despite Trump's denials. The political implications are enormous. These criminal cases are happening alongside impeachment efforts in Congress. The evidence Smith is presenting supports the allegations in the impeachment articles. It shows Trump's pattern of criminal conduct, abuse of power, and obstruction. If Trump is actually convicted in criminal court, it makes impeachment and removal much more likely, because even some Republicans would have trouble defending a convicted felon. But there's also the possibility that institutional weakness allows Trump to escape accountability despite the evidence. If prosecutions fail because the DOJ can't function properly, if trials get delayed indefinitely, if political pressure undermines the cases, Trump could avoid conviction. That would be a disaster for the rule of law. It would show that being powerful enough and creating enough chaos can protect you from consequences even when you commit crimes. Here's my take. The evidence Jack Smith has presented appears to be strong enough to convict Trump if the cases can get to trial and the prosecutions are handled competently. The problem is the massive if. Can the DOJ function well enough to see these cases through? Can prosecutors resist political pressure? Can trials happen before Trump potentially returns to power and pardons himself or has charges dismissed? These are real questions with uncertain answers. What we're watching is a race. Smith is racing to present evidence and move cases forward before institutional collapse makes prosecution impossible. Trump is racing to delay and obstruct until either he regains power or the institutions pursuing him break down completely. The outcome will determine whether presidential accountability is real or just theoretical in America. The institutional crisis at DOJ is deeply troubling. Thousands of career prosecutors leaving represents a hemorrhaging of expertise and independence. These are the people who are supposed to ensure justice is pursued without political consideration. If they're gone, replaced by political appointees or inexperienced staff, the entire system becomes weaker and more vulnerable to manipulation. That's bad for these specific cases and bad for American justice generally. So where does this leave us? Jack Smith has presented devastating evidence showing Trump committed serious crimes related to election interference and classified document handling. The evidence is strong enough that judges have found it compelling and grand juries have returned indictments, but the DOJ itself is in crisis, with mass departures of career prosecutors threatening the institution's ability to successfully prosecute these cases. We're watching a battle between evidence-based prosecution and institutional collapse, with American democracy and the rule of law hanging in the balance. This matters enormously. If Trump is held accountable, it establishes that presidents can't commit crimes with impunity. If he escapes despite strong evidence because institutions are too weak to prosecute him, it establishes that power and chaos can overcome justice. Either outcome will shape American politics and law for generations. The next few months are critical. Trials need to move forward. Evidence needs to be presented to juries. Verdicts need to be reached. And all of that needs to happen while the DOJ is hemorrhaging staff and facing political pressure. It's a test of whether American institutions are strong enough to handle the most important accountability question in modern history. Stay tuned, because this is the endgame for Trump's legal battles and for the principle that no one is above the law.